Hello everybody, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for our webinar in collaboration with Scientifica, From Postdoc to PI, Navigating the Path to Success. My name is Dr. Laura Ashram. I'm the Chief Executive at the British Neuroscience Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all today to join this engaging live panel and hear first-hand insights from researchers who have successfully navigated the launching of their own lab. So this webinar today will cover the essential steps to help you transition to independence, including how to make the most of your postdoc, navigating the job market, getting that first grant, and establishing your own lab. Plus, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions during our live Q&A session. So throughout all of the talks, please do use the Q&A function to submit your questions. You can do that at any time throughout the presentations, and our chair will pick those questions up. So without further ado, I'll now hand you over to Adam Jackson, who is a product specialist at Scientifica and will be hosting the event for us today. Adam.
Great, thanks Laura. So hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. Yeah, my name's Adam Jackson. I'm a product specialist at Scientifica, where we provide world-leading electrophysiology equipment and experimental support to the scientific community. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today for our webinar on navigating the early stages of an academic career. So we all know that making the transition to an independent researcher is both an exciting and a daunting period for young scientists. And so today we have a panel of 4 great speakers who are going to share some of their insights and advice on how to successfully make that career step. So to introduce our speakers today, first we have Dr. Claire Durrant, a tenured group leader at the Centre for Discovery Brain Sciences and an emerging leader in the UK Dementia Research Institute at the University of Edinburgh. Dr. Samuel Sentani, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Translational Neuroscience at Wake Forest University School of Medicine, North Carolina. Dr. Alicia D'Souza, who is an assistant professor in cardiac electrophysiology and a British Heart Foundation Intermediate Fellow in the National Heart and Lung Institute at Imperial College London. And finally, Dr. Russell Morton, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Neurosciences at the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center. So thank you all for being here today and for sharing some of your personal experiences from your own academic careers. So I thought we could start with the process of, actually getting into a faculty role, from building the right experiences during your postdoc to crafting strong applications and securing early funding. This is obviously a highly competitive stage for early career scientists and can be particularly daunting. So starting with you, Alicia, what experiences would you say have helped you most when preparing to apply for independent positions?
Hiya. First of all, thanks, Adam, for the invite. Really delighted to be here contributing to this discussion. So as everyone knows, probably, the bedrock of a good application is a strong publication record. And in my view, a deficit in this area can rarely be compensated for by other things. You need that basis. But beyond that, on reflection, for me, it boiled down to 3 interrelated action points, or my top tips are as follows. The first one is start writing grants early. The second one is acquire quality mentorship early on, preferably. And the third one is to cultivate your own unique niche early on also. So if I could briefly elaborate on these 3 things, the first one being grant writing. So many people, including postdocs and fellows in my own lab, forget that grant writing is a skill that needs to be honed. And as a consequence, many technically brilliant folks are simply quite hopeless when it comes down to writing a persuasive grant application. So in my case, I knew I needed help and I started early. I think I wrote my first grant as a PhD student. It was a load of rubbish in retrospect. But by the time I came to apply for independent funding, I had a range of small grants and society prizes. And also I was a collaborator on bigger grant proposals with senior scientists. And the reason I was able to do this relates to my second top tip, is mentorship. And I cannot overstate the importance of having a good supervisor or mentor to guide you through your initial postdoc years. For example, I was fortunate enough to work with Professor Mark Boyer at the University of Manchester, who had many faults, but he empowered everyone in the lab to be ambitious, to make mistakes in a safe space, and go where the science takes you. And these are values I model in my lab today. But we all know PIs who are less nurturing and more mercenary. And should you find yourself in that position, I encourage you to seek mentorship beyond your direct supervisor to gain diverse insights. And also try to participate in structured mentorship training programs, which all institutes offer. And finally, my top tip then is you must be able to clearly articulate a research question that not only excites you, but importantly distinguishes you from your PI sufficiently. And this takes a lot of time, right? So you want to think about developing a 5-year research plan, outlining those goals early, your potential papers and funding opportunities, and try to get feedback on that, for example, through a small grant. So if I could sum up, in preparation for independence really involves proactively positioning yourself through intentional skill development by seeking mentorship and cultivating a clear and distinct research vision early on.
Great, yeah, and some really clear guidance there for people on the things they can actually do to get themselves into this position. You mentioned obviously mentorship, not everyone is always lucky to have fallen under the wing of a good mentor. And as you mentioned, other avenues are available to people. What kind of thing would you suggest people can do to try and find mentorship outside of the kind of standard PI circle?
I think most institutes do run structured mentorship training programs, and I would suggest that people avail of these in the first instance. But in my own experience, it also helps to cast your net a little bit more widely. For someone I consider my mentor at the moment, in my more senior years, if you like, is someone who doesn't even work in cardiac electrophysiology. He's a neuroscientist, but is someone I admire enormously. And so I seek mentorship outside my field even. So it's really a scientist who you admire. I would reach out to them. And I think most people are very happy to offer advice and support. Of course, there's the occasional sociopath, and they always come with certain spots and warning signs, danger signals, which is a hard avoid. But a
Yeah.
diversity of opinion can be very useful in this situation also. So you need not restrict yourself to one person. That's my view.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, once those foundations of good mentors and practice with application process are in place, the next big challenge for people is obviously putting together a strong faculty application that's going to get you noticed and get you interviews. So Russ, I'd turn to you here. What would you say makes a faculty job application really stand out in your experience?
Yeah, at least from my experience, I think one of the most important things is to make sure that your research really fits into the job application. Just for a good example, we just had a very targeted search within our department looking specifically for someone who did drug addiction with either cocaine or opioids or something like that. We already have a very strong presence in alcohol addiction in our department. And so we were looking to broaden our departmental interests. And so we actually had to eliminate a lot of applications that worked on alcohol because it wasn't very specific to the ad. So that would be my number one suggestion, is make sure your science is really directed towards the position that they're wanting. The second thing that kind of makes the strongest application is that was already mentioned by Alicia, is that you need a good publication record, right? And that can be different things, right? You can think about what usually happens with our applicant pool is you either fall into a pot where you have 3 or 4 publications, but they're all in Nature, Neuroscience, or Cell, right? And then you have the flip side where you have 18 or 20 publications just in lower tier journals. And so, those two situations are hard to measure directly. But as long as it's a good, solid publication record, either lots of smaller papers or a handful of very large papers, goes a long way, and that kind of puts you into that top tier. And so I think that goes back to Alicia's point, where just publish often if you can, as many publications as you can. If you got one in a big high impact journal, that's fantastic. The next thing is usually on our list is grants, right? And so obviously K99 is a thing that we all chase, right? But not only that is, if you've gotten smaller grants as a graduate student and then also as a postdoc, you've already shown that you've had the track record of you can write grants, you've gotten grants, you've been successful. And then the next thing is your research plan. Spend a lot of time on your research plan. Most of the strongest applications with a research plan is directly copied and pasted from their K99, right? And those are the best because you spent the most time on those documents. And so copying that over, those make the strongest applications. The last thing I would suggest, sorry, I'm cutting out, I think, make yourself independent. Figure out some way that you are not copying the exact same thing your postdoctoral PI has done. And that's a hard thing to do, but make it explicit, saying, this is something that I started on my own, and this is the direction that my independent lab would go in contrast to what your current lab is doing. So those would be my overall suggestions for a really strong application.
Yeah. So in terms of thinking about that, displaying your independence, obviously one thing that people do in that situation is seniority in terms of publication being, towards the back end of the publication list, but that's not always something available to people. Can you suggest any other ways that people can go about kind of really highlighting their independent thought and their independent work?
Yeah, actually, the one that usually do the best on this is explicitly saying, this is something that my PI has no interest in, and this is something that I'm taking independently of what they may do. So those kind of just offhand comments are usually the best to give the search committee a really good idea that this is really like something that they have done and they're totally independent. And that usually helps to make that distinction.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, so obviously preparing the application is only half of the battle. The interviews bring their own set of challenges for people that people need to be prepared for. So turning to you now, Claire, what would you suggest early career researchers should expect from their faculty interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it depends on the kind of interview you're going for, right? So for me, my way into sort of faculty position was via a fellowship. So the fellowship interviews have a very rigid process. They ask you to do a presentation. You should very carefully look at exactly the format that they want for that. Don't try and go freestyle. This is not a time to just ad lib. This is a time that you should know this like the back of your hand. Rehearse it, rehearse it, rehearse it. So by the time you get into that interview panel, you can just breathe out this presentation as part of you. And what they're really looking for at this point is you. Is this your idea? Like Russ said, is this something that your supervisor told you to do? Or is this something that you truly understand, truly believe in, and have the capabilities to actually do yourself? That's the kind of thing they're looking for at the interview point. Usually, by the time you've got to interview, they've decided that the project itself is fundable or it's compatible with the institution and what they're looking for. They won't be wasting time interviewing someone who doesn't have a project that it's attractive to them. So that point of the interview is not necessarily to convince them that the project's a good idea, it's to convince them that you're the right person to be running that project. So bear that in mind at interview. So for a fellowship interview or something similar, you could probably expect anywhere between 3 to 20 senior scientists. I've heard that many on sort of Wellcome Trust panels to be interviewing you. For something like a faculty interview, you might find a fewer kind of number of people. But they're really there to try and make the best decision for either the people that provide them with the money, so the charity, the government, or in the case of the university, do they want to work with someone like you? Are you the person they want to have down the hall to go and see? So what can you offer? Can you offer, a great sort of collegiate ability to bring people together? Do you have a new technique that the institution doesn't have? And why do they need to hire you and not the person who's coming into the interview after you? So think about what makes you unique in that aspect. And finally, my last piece of advice is never believe anyone when they tell you that there is a casual chat or a casual tour in any part of this, because as I have done myself when hiring postdocs and PhD students, my favorite thing to do is to send them off on a tour of the lab with a PhD student who's in my lab or a postdoc, and they can really get a feel for what happens when that mask slips, when they feel they're not being judged. And are they asking questions? Are they interested in people? Are they polite to the person who's let them into the room? Have they brought their documents? Are they organized? All of those things are stuff that you're looking for. And it's an opportunity for you as well to kind of get that backdoor insight into what's happening at the university. So ask questions, ask the people who seem to be avoiding you what it's like to work in that place as well, and try and make the best decision for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a good point you raise. Interviews are a two-way street, right?
Yeah.
It's finding out, do you want to work with them, and as well as do they want to work with you? And obviously choosing the right institute is a big part of becoming successful and establishing your lab. So it is important to keep those kind of things in mind.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'd like to talk about funding now. Obviously, this is the lifeblood of science kind of thing. It's something that's essential during both your postdoc, as we've mentioned, and PhD even, trying to get smaller grants and things like that. But obviously also very important when trying to establish your independence. So Sam, what would you say makes a grant application truly competitive?
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for the question. Yeah, I wish if I had a perfect answer, then I would probably have 100% success rate. So I'll give you my advice, since I do not have 100% success rate. But some things that I've seen as a reviewer of grants and of someone that's I've gotten a few grants here and there, so I would say I'm mildly successful. But yeah, I think the biggest thing to think about, whether you're a grad student, postdoc, or a new PI, is to sell yourself, sell your science, and sell your passion. So think about that the entire time you're writing your grant. All my training and expertise, which is selling yourself, combined with my passion for this topic, which is shown through the literature and other things that you're citing in your grants, makes me uniquely qualified to study this question that no one has been able to answer yet. And if you're not fully qualified, bring in people that are. Bring in PI, co-PIs and other people that can help you out with areas that you're trying to grow into. And so it's really thinking about that and hooking in the reviewer early on. So on hooking the reviewer in, keep your questions straightforward. How does X relate to Y? Save the complexity for later on. It's just a very simple hypothesis that someone can grab onto early on, follow it along. Repetition is another key way to get this across. But if you lose a reviewer early on, it's very hard to get them back. So save the complexity, the nitty-gritty details for later on. And there's a colleague that shared a quote with me last week from Tom Watson, the former president of IBM. He said, "If a man wants a blue suit, just turn on a blue light." And that's poignant to me in thinking about it in grant writing terms, because you really are trying to show your passion, but you also need to guide towards where your funding, what your funding source is, what you're applying for, the different foundations or institutions, what they're interested in. So not getting too far away from what your passion is, but also adjusting your perspective to match the expectations. You can, if your goal is to cure cancer, but you're applying for a foundation that is just interested in basic science, you can turn your goal that direction for now, which could eventually help you get to the larger the goal of curing cancer through a certain lens. And so that's one piece of advice. The other one that I think is a little more tangible is attention to detail. It's so easy to sink a grant or just lose a reviewer based on the things that are addressable and easily fixable. Things like small figures, trying to jam figures in there, typos. So my advice would be to print out your grant. Look at what the figure looks like on a printed piece of paper. It's easy to zoom in 500% on Adobe and say, this looks great. But there are people out there that still print these grants and read them. The other piece of advice is to have the grant read to you. It's something that's really been an awesome thing that I've adopted in my own grant writing. You pick up so much run-on sentences, words that are not typos, but are the wrong words that then you meant. So to me, that's a really a useful tool to do. To use. And so the last thing I'll say is that, which has kind of been touched on, is quantity helps quality. So applying for everything, small grants, whether it's $1,000, $5,000, Apply for giving talks. These can help with your faculty applications too. I think that these are really valuable ways to get practice and to refine and in an ideal scenario, get feedback on these grants. But you look back at I look back at some of the grants that I wrote early on as a postdoc and as a assistant professor, and it's hard to read them sometimes, so I try not to. But you always are finding new ways to sell it and to get that main point across. So those are just kind of overview ways that I think are helpful for grant writing.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things you mentioned, like no one's batting 1,000, right, when it comes to grant applications, no scientist out there. So, and that's also true of many other aspects, like doing the job hunt. So dealing with rejection is part of being a senior scientist, right? So I guess just as a general question, and I'll start with you, Sam, how do you deal with that? Like, what advice do you have for people for kind of like keeping the faith, I guess, with the applications?
Yeah, honestly, the more rejections you get, the easier it is. So that's actually fits right in with the quantity. I get obviously the bigger grants are obviously harder to take, and they always will be. But if you're applying for a lot of these smaller grants or medium-sized grants, I mean, it eases the pain a little bit when you say, "All right, there's another one in the hopper that's going to be reviewed next week." And I also think a good piece of advice is, I have students that often feel defeated, like they spent all this time on this grant and it didn't get funded. But to me, it's like you spent all this time on this grant. Number one, you organize your thoughts. Number two, this grant can easily be reformatted into another grant. So it's never wasted time unless you completely ditch a project. But I think that it's important to keep these grants as fluid documents that can grow and be submitted elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely. That's great advice. So before we move on to talk about, the actual process of setting up a lab and establishing yourself, just open up to if anybody would like to add anything further to any of the discussions that we've had so far about finding a position and that first initial application. No, all talked out. Okay. Russ, you
I think
have
all I'd say is I think cast a wide net, right? You never know where your application might land. And so if your science fits a particular position in somewhere you never thought you'd go, you'd still apply, right? And all those experiences add up, and it makes it easier when you go to the big institute that you want to go to, and you've already had 3 interviews in your pocket, right? And that helps a lot. So just a cast of a wide net.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we move on to kind of the next phase now, I suppose. So we've secured our role. Now the real adventure begins of setting up your lab and trying to build a team and establishing yourself both within your department, but also, in the wider scientific field. So again, starting with you, Alicia, setting up a lab can be both exciting and overwhelming. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you were getting started, and how did you prioritize those things?
Just mute myself there. I think the first year of running my lab as an independent fellow was really a humbling experience. And looking back on it, I think it's analogous to probably having a startup in which you're the CEO and the CFO, and you also do the dishes. And if anything breaks, which is, let's face it, every day in electrophysiology, it's up to you to fix it. But once I got past these initial teething problems, the biggest challenge for me personally was the shift from hands-on researcher to lab leader, because that demands new skills and very fast, such as effective delegation, clear communication, and time management, not just your own, but also those around you. Because what becomes obvious very fast is that your vision and expertise might set the initial direction, but your success is contingent on your ability to enable others to conduct research at a high standard. But luckily for me, I've worked with some fantastically talented and dedicated people over the years, and by and large, it's been a pleasure. However, I find it quite hard to sometimes adapt to diverse work styles and also career aspirations. For example, some people in my lab are nocturnal, And in my previous lab, I've had students and also fellows who clearly did not want a career in bench science as I practiced it. And I still find it tricky sometimes to navigate difficult conversations, both professionally and constructively. So it's a learning curve, as with most things. And if I could sum it up, I think the challenge was for me in crystallizing this shift in mindset from thinking only about experiments to thinking about people and projects and really purpose as well. For example, I often think about, are people in my lab happy? How are we operating as a team? Am I fostering an environment where good science happens? And it's been a challenging shift, I have to say, but ultimately, I feel a fulfilling one.
Yeah, it's a very good points there. I mean, one thing that's always occurred to me about the early career scientists starting at a lab is just how crucial good recruitment must feel. You know, it's kind of, in many cases, you're a lab of one, and maybe a grad student, maybe a postdoc, if you're able to secure the funding. And really, you're hanging a lot of your hopes on the performance of that individual. So kind of,
Yeah,
how did you handle that
absolutely.
process?
I think it's really difficult because ideally you'd want someone fantastic and you hit the ground running with them. But in reality, you kind of have to work with, you have to learn to work with people with diverse skill sets. And I think this is especially true of electrophysiology because people tend to hold on to the really good ones, right? So for me, it's always a matter of investing in talent. Okay, they might not have everything you need, but you need to be ready to spend that time and that energy on someone and develop them or mold them in the way that you see best fit for where your lab is at that stage. But of course, as it gets bigger, that pressure reduces a little bit. And my solution, my top tip for that really is just have multiple irons in the fire because not everything will work all the time. So I think it's about not pinning all your hopes on one thing working or a certain thing panning out just how you thought it might. And also, let's face it, scientists, like everybody, are a bit, can be a really mixed bag, both personality wise and also in terms of their skill sets. So it's about you being adaptable and being ready to work with a diverse personality set, if you like.
Well said, well said. Yeah, yeah, so really there you've highlighted it can bring a lot of new challenges and expectations, right, from previous roles that scientists have kind of inhabited. So Sam, turning to you again, from your perspective, what do you see as your most important role or job as a PI? And I guess, how has that changed from how you perceived the role previously as a postdoc?
Yeah, so Alicia hit on a lot of great points that I'll reiterate, but I would say that the most important job is the job that you're doing at this present time. As tongue in cheek that is, I think that focusing on not overcommitting, not over, spreading yourself too thin, and working on whatever that focus is at the time, whether it's helping a student with a grant or whether it's writing your own grant and kind of zeroing in on that, writing a manuscript, things like that. I think it's not spreading yourself too thin. And right after starting a lab, I think the most important job is to obviously build up that lab from a equipment perspective, getting everything up and running. Really, you're the technician, the grad student, the postdoc, you're kind of all rolled into one at that point. And your goal is to recruit, as was mentioned. So, I mean, how do you recruit? You need to have something there for the students to do, or the trainees or technicians or postdocs to do. So making sure that everything is working in the way that you want it to work. And once it is, creating really good protocols that people can follow so that you're not having to micromanage and be down there a little more than you need to be, even if it's making solutions or how to analyze the data. It's that those are things that are really important. And again, if something's not right, what do you do? What's the protocol for troubleshooting? That's where things like Scientifica come into handy, where you have other contacts that might not be you that can alleviate some of that. But then it shifts, right? So I mean, then as Alicia alluded to, I think there's a shift to stepping back a little bit. And I think I would say right now, as 3.5 years into it, I would say being a mentor is probably one of the most important jobs right now. Supporting my trainees, setting them up for success, and admitting when you don't think it can work, right? Whether it's a student that's trying out the lab through rotations or whatnot. And it's very easy to just take anyone that's interested in your lab. It's flattering when someone wants to join your lab early on. And so it's tough to sometimes see see the actual benefit of having this person in your lab, how they might work out, and really aligning goals with them. And so one thing I did early on as a new assistant professor was to really focus on learning how to be a mentor. I know how I was mentored and the experiences I got were excellent and great, but that worked for me. So it was really important for me to read books and to take classes and to learn about how to be a kind of a mentor for every type of student. So I spent a lot of time dedicating to that, and I think good mentoring makes the students and trainees and feel supported, which yields good science, which yields good grants and good papers and talks. And it's just a snowball effect that starts with the people that are on the front line working on some of this data and collecting the data and analyzing the data. And then the other area is to, as far as picking who's going to be in your lab and what they're going to do, is to be flexible in your own mindset too. So you obviously there's trainees that might want a predefined project that will really just hit the ground running and they can just dig into it. But others may want to bring something to the lab that you haven't done or thought of. And I think that's where it gets really exciting. And you can see your lab growing and you can see the vision of where your lab might be in 5 years. So being open to different types of trainees and how they might be best supported and what their ultimate goals are. And the last thing I'll throw in there is that every PI should credit your mentees whenever you can. Talks, as you're networking with other people. It's a very little gesture that goes a long way with building up confidence of your mentees.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone in the audience would agree with you there. Yeah, so you mentioned, obviously, it sounds like you did quite a lot of self-learning for mentorship and found some resources, that kind of stuff. Have you found any that you found particularly useful, or any like official channels that maybe your school kind of provided for you?
Yeah, so a couple of the opportunities were right through the institution here, which were nice. We had a mentor academy that's really took through us, give a lot of small reading sources. There's actually a lot of good papers out there that kind of highlight different mentoring styles that I can share in the chat. And then there's there's a book behind me that I can pull up the exact title for too. But yeah, there's a lot of resources out there, and if there's any in your institution, I would certainly, I think it's a valuable tool to take advantage of. But there's a lot of self-guided ways to optimize it as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that's something that probably everyone could benefit from, right? So you haven't been selected necessarily for this position because of your mentorship abilities, but it becomes such an enormous part of what's expected of you, that it really is crucial to kind of hone those skills, and very important for establishing yourself as a successful PI. So so alongside managing both people and projects, your visibility in the scientific field becomes more and more important. So turning again to you, Russell, what strategies did you use that helped you gain recognition early on?
Yeah, when I first started my lab, I was super excited and I wanted to get my name out there. And I actually started a Twitter account for the lab. And then I slowly realized that I'm not good at Twitter, that I don't post often enough. And that's something I don't think about. I don't have a Twitter account for myself. And so doing it for the lab just wasn't second nature. But what I did think that I did successfully was I established my own website, and I bought my own domain and had it up and visible. This is something that is probably different for every institute. Most institutes don't want individual PIs having their control of their web pages. Some institutes do, which is fantastic. And so My own website was actually the best way that I was able to update frequently with publications, but had my lab presence out there. And so I think that would really help me kind of push my name out into the world of science. The other thing that I think is helpful is attend smaller conferences, right? We all tend to think about, oh, going to SFN every year. But it's really the smaller conferences where you actually get to talk one-on-one with people in the field, and you really get to know the others who are, you know, the leaders in the field, and the other people's at your stages actually has been the most fruitful, is meeting other assistant professors, trying to get a hold into that field, right? And having that kind of exposure is much more beneficial than attending a 30,000 attendee conference. The other thing that I think is beneficial when you're first starting out and making yourself visible is actually really good science, right? If your publications are going out the door with just really hard controlled, really thought out science, it will make an impact. And you might not see it right away, but if you keep producing really quality science, your name will get out there. And so I think, you know, it's hard to make a big splash. And if you are on Twitter and you're doing it daily, you can, I've seen lots of people have been very successful for that, but that was just not me. And so I think you need to pay attention to what you're good at and what you're not good at. The last thing I would say, which it's been kind of highlighted through Sam was saying as well, is when you first start out as a PI and you got a new lab and you're all by yourself, the thing you have is time. And so if you really can commit a lot of time to that first set of projects that are going to kind of take your lab off the ground, those are what you should focus at. Because as you start to progress, I think this applies to any career. As you start to progress, your time becomes very valuable and you don't have much of it. So you need to then delegate things to the people who you bring up. So I think realizing that you do have a little bit of time in the beginning and use it wisely and not just kind of waste it on sit back and kind of watch your lab develop. Really kind of take that time and put it towards your lab and your mentees.
Yeah. So thinking about that early time period, is that a time that you would suggest like really focusing on your own work and like your own bigger picture kind of thing? Or would you also encourage kind of trying to seek collaboration, whether that's within your department or outside your department? Is that a good time for that, like as you're just first getting established, or does that come later?
I think that comes later. I think one troublesome area that people kind of find themselves into is they get into a department and then want to collaborate with everyone, right? And you spread yourself way too thin. And I think that's something to avoid, right? When you get in, really take your research plan back out, reread it, be like, okay, this is what I'm here to do, right? And really focus in on that, because if you start too many collaborations early, everyone is going to want to suck your time away. And that's a time when you need to focus on your projects and what you're going to be doing. Once you're established and you have a couple graduate students plugging along on your project, that's the time when you can start reaching out, making collaborations and doing things not directly on your project path.
Yeah, very good advice. So we've obviously covered a lot of the professional side of the work, but of course there's a very strong personal element to all these things too. So Claire, what would you say you wish you had known about work-life balance as you were making the transition to a PI?
I think always follow your own path, and what's a priority to you is a really important thing. So I've just had children, so I've got a 3.5-year-old and a 9-month-old. So I'm very fresh in the having come from maternity leave and all of this sort of thing. Certainly maternity leave 1 was very different to maternity leave 2. So maternity leave 1, it was me and a PhD student running the lab. So effectively, the PhD student did a different project for 6 months and the lab kind of froze while I was off. Maternity leave 2, I have 3 postdocs, 4 PhD students, 2 masters. The lab ain't going to stop when I'm off. So there was a lot more email checking and things, but I was very cautious to do it in a way that meant I felt on top of the lab, felt like I was still in control, felt that they could still contact me, but I also protected that time as well. But other people do things very differently. They'd go off for a year and shut the emails down and stop, but everyone has their way. So don't feel guilty about your way. My main piece of advice is that, as sort of Sam sort of alluded to earlier, I am a genuine believer that happiness drives success, not the other way around. And I think if you pin your happiness on professional successes, you will find yourself chasing things that become further and further away, and things like rejections will just hit so much harder, because if you see your science as a personal extension of you to an extent that's pathological, you will feel that hit as a hit on you, as opposed to, oh, that's a hit on one of my grants, but I've got other options, and actually I'm just going to go out and have dinner with my friends tonight, and that's going to help me forget, and then tomorrow I'll come back fresh with new ideas. So I really do see some people who put every part of their soul into their job. And for me, certainly, I find having golden time where I can spend time with my children, having time I can get out into the Scottish countryside where I live, that's when my ideas reset. And when I'm rested and fresh, I can really come back into my science and have great ideas. And, you know, problems always seem less big when you're fresh, when you're rested, when you've got other options. If you're desperate and knackered, that's when you start finding yourself going down the rabbit hole. And I think that is infectious to your trainees as well. And that if they're looking after their mental health, if they're working patterns that suit them, they're kind to each other, they're supportive, you're going to have an environment that's producing good science, but also, not to sound too dark, producing science you can trust. I really, really worry about labs where there is this huge pressure that we need to have this paper done by tomorrow. I want to get this high impact thing. You worry that under those circumstances, trainees could be pressured to skip their controls. You know, things might not be done the way you want. You need to have an environment where failure is acceptable and celebrated as a demonstration that someone's doing something rigorously. So in my lab, certainly negative data is seen as positively, and sometimes, if not more positively than positive data, because it means that we're testing things the right way. And I think that comes from people being happy and secure in their environment. So it's a huge priority for me. Not quite sure if I get the balance right all the time, but certainly making sure that you're rested and happy is really crucial.
Yeah, very well said. And a lot of those things apply to every career stage, right? You know, it's like also as a postdoc, PhD student, it's very important to find that balance. And if you can find it, you know, both things will benefit, hopefully. So I think that's it's a really good thing for people to focus on. So before we move on to final reflections, just again, open up to see if there's anything else anybody wants to add that we've missed related to kind of setting up your own lab, increasing visibility, or the work-life balance aspect.
So I had a point about hiring, really. So I have a triad of qualities that every member of my team must have. And as Alicia said, I love diversity. I love diversity of personalities, skill sets, ideas, and things. So I use this triad as a way of, despite that diversity, what's the things that I want everyone to have in common? And you must be all three of smart. Doesn't have to be academic smart. It can be working out how to solve a problem, the kind of person who can fix an incubator, really motivated to do that. You must be nice, so a decent human to work with, and you must be driven. And that means that you're motivated to go to work every day. You're motivated to solve problems. You're curious. And you can all think of examples probably of people who fulfill two of those criteria, and without the third, are a total nightmare to work with and manage. So smart, nice, driven. If they have the kind of qualities on paper I'm looking for, and then in my assessments with them, they're those. That is my golden team member that I always look to recruit.
Yeah, very good. I mean, I would say from my personal experience that I was very lucky to have mentors who put a lot of thought into the dynamic that their hiring could create in the lab. So they were very conscious of that and would come and ask us, you know, like, what did you think of this person? Like, how do you think they would fit in? Because, you know, it doesn't take much to really throw off the dynamic of a team. And I always really appreciated that as a PhD student and postdoc. So yeah, I think it's important to have those kind of rules in place. Okay, so to wrap up the formal part of the webinar, I'd like to ask each of you to share one piece of advice that you would give to your earlier self when you were starting out in academia. So we'll start with you, Alicia, please.
I think when Claire was speaking, I was just thinking, yeah, that's all the things I did wrong. And I wish I was more mindful in cultivating, especially at the start of my independent lab, carving out time for my own well-being. That's also the time when, my daughter's 8 years old now. And to be honest, some of those early years are just a blur. I was working all the time. I was writing grants all the time. I was building the lab. Everything was breaking at the same time. And looking back, I should have kind of, taken a step back, turn the rheostat down a little bit at least, and, smell the roses every now and then. But as time's gone on, I have started getting a little bit better than that. So yeah, my advice to my former self would be chill out.
Russ?
Yeah, I think my advice for my younger self would be write early and often in your training. I did not do that. And I was always hyper focused on the next experiment and what was going next and the next control. And my PI did all the writing. And so when I got to be a PI, you realize that's all you do as a PI is write. So if you can do it early and polish it a little bit before you get your independent position, you'll be way better off.
Right. Claire?
So for me, it's very much never rule yourself out of an opportunity. If you think you hit 50% of the criteria, just go for it. They will tell you no, don't worry. You're not going to get hired and be some great imposter somewhere. If they really think you can't do it, they'll tell you no. So always push the boundaries of what you think. If it's slightly scaring you to apply for something, it's probably a good sign that it's something that's progressing you. And I'd also say, don't try and be really rigid in planning your life out, because you need to be flexible to take opportunities as they come. Don't worry about, well, I'll have kids when I get X fellowship. You can never plan your life. You have no idea what's going to happen around the corner. So always, if you get to 80% sure, just go for it. Think, I really do want kids in the next 5 years. Well, maybe start thinking about it now. Or you think, oh, well, I do really want to get a professorship in the next 5 years. Well, if you start going for these things a bit earlier, there's no shame in that. So I wouldn't say have a rigid life plan. Go with the flow and not worry about exact timelines and I'll do X when I have Y, because you may never get Y. So don't wait for it.
Nice. And Sam, finally?
Yeah, all great answers that I agree with. So I'll try to find something unique. I will say work-life balance, lowering expectations early on with how long things can take to set up a lab. I thought I would be patching from a cell 2 days after I set up my rig, and things take a lot longer than you think. So set the expectations lower, go with the flow, as Claire said. And as a unique answer, I will say absorb everything you can from your postdoc lab or wherever you are before you start your position. Take pictures of everything, the systems that are in place for keeping things organized, and really document and absorb it all before you go, because it's a lot easier to do it then than have to bug people that are still in the lab when you're gone. So
yeah, I think that is a really good idea. Definitely something I think a lot of us probably wish we would have done at certain times in our lives. So yeah, I just want to thank you all for such great answers to those questions. Really considered and honest and very insightful. So I hope everyone's kind of can take something away from those answers. We're going to shortly move on to the Q&A. But whilst we just quickly organize the questions, I'm going to highlight the role that Scientifica tried to play in supporting researchers making the transition to independence through our lab consultation service. So this is a service that we provide that's really focused on trying to help both new labs and established labs get their systems up and running and working in the best way possible. So whether you are needing to buy all new equipment or whether you've inherited some equipment that needs upgrading, we try and work together with you to try and establish exactly what you need to try and do the exact science that you were trying to do. And we do that through expert recommendations, discussing with you what your plans and aims are. And through that, we can provide this personalized support both on budgets, timelines, and space constraints, all the things that, as Sam mentioned, kind of get in the way and actually stop you from being able to do your science as quickly as you would probably like to. And we aim to work with you basically throughout the entire process. So from day one, when you're just thinking about applying for a grant, we can work with you to provide costings, talk about what you really need and what you don't need, try and make sure that basically at every stage in the process, from application to success to purchasing to install, is a success. So I think a poll will be popping up on your screen shortly to ask if you would like to discuss this with us further. So yeah, please click yes, and we can continue this conversation either about the free lab consultations or just any other equipment needs that you might have. So with that, we will move on to the Q&A. So yeah, people can still enter questions that they would like to be answered. So yeah, just going in for the first one. So when did you know what your niche was? Did you know what research you wanted to do prior to your first postdoc, or did you do a few years before knowing where to go? So yeah, it'd be great if everyone could chip in on the questions, but I'll address that one to you, Russ, if you're happy to give an answer.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So I think Claire mentioned it, be flexible, right? You might not, on your day one of your PhD, you may not know where you're going to end up. And so just think about the opportunities that are in front of you. So for instance, I totally changed fields going from a postdoc to a PI because the opportunity was in front of me, right? And so I applied for a position, I got it, and I developed a whole different project. And so you really need to be flexible and look at the opportunities that are in front of you. And one last thing I'll comment to that as well is when you're trying to, in your postdoc, I always called them the Friday afternoon experiments, right? Always try something that you have no idea if it's going to work or not. And that's how you can kind of carve out your niche and independence from your postdoctoral PI, is if you found this one great effect and now you can take it in a new direction. I think those are important things to do as you prepare.
There's actually a second part to the question, which I think would be interesting for the American audience. So this question is anonymous, but one thing they mention is they're a first-year postdoc who has moved from the UK to the US and is kind of met with this expectation for postdocs to move to independent positions within 5 years, which I would highlight is probably not really the case, at least in the UK. So how do you have any suggestions for people kind of dealing with that pressure? Is that a real thing, 5 years and that's it? Or do you have a different experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's I would say it's a little more than 5 years. It all depends. I mean, the K99 is R00 route is the most common transition period, which is a 2-year K99 followed by 3 years of funding for independence. And you're eligible for that grant within the first 4 years of your postdoc. So you do the math, that's about 4 years to get the grant and then 2 years to work on that grant to transition. So that's about 6 years. So there really isn't as rigid of a timeline. But I would say that, yeah, it's really, I wouldn't say that, I guess the part of that question that asks if you know what you were doing basically, or what you wanted to do in the first year. And I would say absolutely not. I kind of knew an idea. I knew I wanted to be in a certain subfield. And that I think helps if you keep it broad, is that I want to look, personally, we're interested in studying stress and alcohol use disorder and the interactions between the two. So that's the umbrella, right? But then I can go into a million different directions with where we want to go, and that may change based on what's happening in the field. So I would say think about what you want to do as broadly as you need to think about that, whether it's I want to be in neuroscience, or you could start with that and narrow it down. But I don't think it comes overnight. I think it comes with data. I think it comes with the techniques you're learning, and the questions you're answering. So
Yeah, great, thanks for that. I think this is probably a good question for Claire based on your previous answer, but do you have a skill intelligence competence test for your trainees when you interview them, such as having them solve something or grilling them about their deep knowledge?
I have a system and I take hiring extremely seriously. So I have thought about this very carefully. No, there's no such thing as an intelligent test that would tell you someone is great. You know, I check references religiously for someone who's really looks good on paper and I really like. I will ring up their previous PIs and sort of ask a little bit about how they were to work with, the kind of stuff they were leading on, that sort of thing. I would say that one thing I do that I've introduced that has sort of spread around the University of Edinburgh, as people have seen that it works quite well, is alongside interviews, I ask people to do a 10-minute presentation on any previous topic. So their PhD work, their postdoc work, whatever they want to talk to me about. I don't really care what they want to tell me about, but it's interesting just to see how they present. But I also give them a task, usually a week in advance. So this is only the people I'm interviewing, where they get one slide and I give them a question. And the question is usually related to a research question of mine. And I would say, how would you design an experiment, say, for example, to test the effect of lowering protein X on synaptic function? And then it is the most incredible differentiator of people. So my amazing postdoc, Soraya, who had that pretty much exact question, she came to me with, these are the kind of controls I would have. These are the different outputs that I'd look at. Are you looking at synaptic function on this scale? Are you looking at it on a kind of cognitive scale? And then here's how I would lower this protein. I've looked up these different drugs and I've read this paper. And it was just, you could just tell she's going to be a postdoc who's one day going to be a PI. And then you had at the other end of the scale, people coming in who barely attempted the question or even, you know, didn't even mention the word statistics in their comment. And this is a postdoc position. And having that pre-prepared time, it really sees how you'd work in a lab, because some people aren't great at answering questions on the fly, but you give them a day to go and think about a problem and come back, and they'll come back with the most creative solution. And that's been phenomenal for differentiating those people that look really good on paper. So I would recommend it to people who want to do the same.
Yeah, very interesting. So another question we have from Anonymous again. Any advice on having a difficult conversation with a not motivated research assistant / lab member? Alicia, would you like to weigh in on that one?
I'm not very good at this. I'm also looking for advice on this topic. So, but jokes aside, I think you have to be quite clear in setting your expectations at the get-go, and that's what I try to do. Like, this is my part of the psychological contract. This is your part, and you know, keeping those lines of communication open and clear. And you know, I worry about this sometimes because you expect a whole lot of people, right? You expect a lot out of them. You expect their dedication and to, you know, give them a kind of half-baked idea and they've got to run with it and really think quite hard and work quite long hours. And we do a lot of work in acutely dissociated, isolated human hearts. So they're here all the time. And I worry that I don't pay them very much, right? So I always try to meet them halfway. I try to see what is the problem. You know, I try to put myself in their situation. They might not want the same career path. They might not want, I try to explore their motivations really, if I'm having trouble in figuring out why someone isn't performing as well as they should. And in my experience, people are, you know, some people clam up in this type of situation. So I try and style myself as a cool, easygoing person, but really nobody falls for that. So I try to meet them halfway and really get to the bottom of how could I help? You know, how could I empower them to succeed? What could I do? And I think people appreciate that and kind of, you know, usually come up with something semi-half-baked. But I think also it's electrophysiology is a tough one, right? So in my lab, we focus on the specialized electrical wiring system of the heart, the cardiac conduction system, and there simply aren't many cells to patch, and it's hard. The days are very long. And what we also do in my lab is also lots of multi-omics, this type of thing, which, you know, it's just someone generating kilometers of data from one experiment and someone trying to patch clamp these 10 cells in 2 weeks, which would be an astonishingly awesome rate of patching and productivity. Just trying to balance those expectations as well. You know, it depends on the project, and I try to look at it case by case. So I can't, there's no magic recipe on how conflict resolution, but those are my general strategies, I would have thought.
Yeah.
I'll add a couple of resources because that sparked the name of the book I was trying to think of. It's called Difficult Conversations, and it's very good at, it's not a science specific book, but it's just how to understand where other people are coming from. And it was really influential in sort of how to deal with conflict on several different levels outside of lab as well. And then the other tool was this Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. You can Google it, TKI. But it's a test that you can take to kind of assess how you operate. Some of these things can be good for screening. Was one of the questions. But there are tools out there that you and your lab can take to kind of see, well, you deal with things this way, I deal with things this way, and it gives you a kind of a quantitative way of thinking about different personalities in the lab.
Great. I mean, we are just coming towards the end of the hour, so we'll just squeeze one last question in, if that's okay. From Urani, how broad the application for a faculty position should be? More like a 5-year grant on a specific question, even though the lab will expand from that afterwards. Russ, do you have anything to say for that?
Yeah, I can weigh in on that. So we've just hired 5 new faculty the last 5 years. So this is something that we gauge often. If you're applying to a broad application ad, you can really think about, we kind of consider it in 2 stages. You should really have a very good idea of what the first and second year of your independent project should look like, with specific aims and experiments and all that kind of stuff. And then we second look for what would your first R01 look like? And if you can accurately and with high clarity get those 2 points across, you're going to be off to the races for sure. And so really having that like 5-year plan of what the first R01 is going to look like is, that comes across strongly, you'll be sitting in a good position.
Great. So yeah, I guess that brings us to the end of today's session. A huge thank you to all 4 of you for, again, for such honest and insightful reflections. And thank you to the audience for joining also and providing their questions. Hopefully this gave some useful tools for people and some perspectives for their own journey. I mean, I've learned a lot. Any further questions that people have, we at Scientifica would love to hear from you. You can contact us through our website, scientifica.uk.com. And yeah, take care, and we hope to see you again soon at the next one.